Hi everybody, welcome back. Good to be back here on the bench. I got up really early this morning because we were supposed to get a really big snowstorm, and that actually did hit. I'm not going to get too bad here at the house, so it's going to kind of bypass us, but the area where I was doing a service call this morning really got hit hard, so I wanted to get in and get out. That means that I have a little bit extra time today to work at the bench, and we're going to try to do something different and interesting in this video. We're going to talk about a type of broadcasting for radio that was only done for a short while, mid to late 1950s, and it probably ended in 1960, 1961. And what it's referred to is binaural broadcasting, where they take the left channel of a stereo broadcast and they broadcast it on, for instance, an AM station, and the right channel, for instance, and they would broadcast it on an FM station. And the idea is, if you had an AM and an FM tuner with right and left channel stereo amplifier, you can receive the two broadcasts and put them together and get a stereo sound. Now, here's the thing. You would think, right away, the first thought, FM is so much clearer sounding and has so much more bandwidth than AM. It's so much higher fidelity. Wouldn't that sound really bad? Well, I think you're going to be really pleasantly surprised, because if we look over here at this Scott 399, let's go over some of the controls on it. And if I can get my camera adjusted and get you backed out a little bit here. Okay, so let's look at some of these controls. I'll put a little bit of light on the subject. Here we go. This layout of this receiver is not like a standard receiver that you're used to seeing. If you look on to the left, your input selector, really you have phono on this side and you have extra, which is your auxiliary input. But these two controls in the middle, there's only 4 selections you can choose from. This first one is called AM FM stereo that we're going to look at. The other one is called FM FM multiplex stereo. What do they mean? If you look, you have an FM tuning knob and you have an AM tuning knob. If you look at the stereo selector, you have balance of A, balance B, which is you're just looking at the balanced input of channel A or balanced input of channel B. You have monophonic records, so that's going to take your left and right channel and mix them together into a mono signal and then split them back off into 2 mono signals for the amplifier to play on 2 channels. You have true stereo, which just splits the right and left channel amplifiers, and we'll get a little more into that in a minute. And then you have reverse stereo, and all that does is it takes right and left channels and swaps them around. It's like unplugging the cables and swapping them. And then you have channel A FM and channel B AM. What's that mean? Well, what that means is that if we set it to this, it's only going to play the FM tuner section, and it will play it through both channels, so that's a little bit deceptive. In other words, it's going to play everything, just the FM tuner, through the amplifiers. If you go to this one, it's going to play it like a mono AM tuner. So think of these as mono FM and mono AM. But the interesting one is when we go to stereo mode. When you go to stereo mode and AM FM stereo over here, it's going to play the left channel FM and it's going to play the right channel on AM, if that makes sense. So you also have this AM selectivity. And this is a very important switch because it switches between distant and wide, they're calling it. What they mean by wide is that it's going to actually have the maximum frequency response that you can get in an FM broadcast. And you're going to be surprised how much fidelity, when you flip this switch over here, you're going to get out of the AM tuner of this radio. I was quite surprised. So what I want to do is I want to set up a little system where we have two signal generators, and we're going to use them like two little radio stations. One of them is going to be set to broadcast on the FM band at 94 megahertz. The other one is going to be set to work on the broadcast AM broadcast band at 1 megahertz or 1000 kilohertz, where we're tuned right here. And I'm going to put this little music player, the MP3 player, I'm going to come out of the left channel and I'm going to connect it to the FM signal generator, and the right channel I'm going to put into the AM signal generator, and we're going to broadcast and receive with this tuner a binaural AM/FM stereo signal. So if you think that sounds interesting, stay tuned, and that's what we're going to do for most of this video. Now the other thing we're going to go over is this loudness control, the volume pot. I did replace it with a brand new one, and I have a few notes I want to bring up on that. And last but not least, I will warn you up front, I turned this thing on and both the AM and FM worked on this. The AM was totally silent when I first tested it, but then I found out there's an AM and FM output level knob on the back, and the AM output knob was turned all the way down. All I had to do is turn it up. Now the FM, I don't even know if I'm going to have to do anything to it. Maybe touch up the discriminator a wee little bit. The AM, I think the rotor on the tuning gang is a bit dirty and is going to need cleaned, and it's not very sensitive. So either we have a weak tube or we may have something that's a little bit out of alignment. I don't think, knock on wood, I don't think any of the IF cans have any silver mica disease or anything. They all seem to be good. So I think we may luck out on this one, but I don't want to speak too soon. As you can see, the faceplate and everything is beautiful on this thing. It's in great shape. So I'm really excited to do this little broadcasting thing and see exactly what it sounds like. Now I'm going to use some kind of a recording that's YouTube safe that has as much stereo separation as I can get so we can kind of hear it. And then I'll kind of tune both of these a little bit afterwards and show you that it is in fact tuned to FM and AM right and left channel. All right, let's get started with our video. So if you look, we have our 8657A set up for FM broadcast, and you can see I'm using an external modulation, and it's coming out of my little MP3 player, my little music player. And when we look over here, I have the Fluke 6071A set up for AM broadcast. It's set to 1 megahertz or 1000 kilohertz. This one is set to 94 megahertz. Now the AM needs a little bit of adjustment, so I had to put a pretty fairly strong signal out for this thing to receive it. But they're both going into the back of the receiver, and as you can see, I have both channels set up, and it's pretty surprising how good this turns out. So what we're going to do is, over here, if you notice, I have my little Zoom recording. I'm going to try to take a fairly decent recording of this. The two speakers are across the room. Obviously, I don't have spacing and everything, and there's a lot of reflective surfaces, so we are definitely not going to get a really high quality recording, but hopefully it'll be enough stereo that you can hear it. I really hope. And I don't have anything super duper wide stereo, but it's just a YouTube safe audio. You can see we're tuned in, and both of the tuning eyes work pretty well. And this is what it looks like with the faceplate. So let's turn up the volume, and I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to stop the video and restart it for another clip, and I'm going to get these two things recording at the same time. Okay, hopefully, yep, everything's working. And let me get this started up, and I may have to adjust the volume a little bit. And I'm just going to play some YouTube audio, if it'll work, that is. Let's see what it does. Oh, come on. Here we go. Turn it a little bit. Well, what'd you guys think? Pretty amazing how it turned out, isn't it? Well, it wasn't easy to get that. When you set these up, you have to make sure that the modulation on the FM and the AM side is very similar. You have to make sure that the two channels are equally broadcast at an equal amplitude, or the channels will be out of balance. It'll kind of not sound good. So you could see how this would have been quite the challenge back then to actually get a good stereo sound. But if you did that, it will in fact sound really, really good. I was quite amazed at the high frequency response that I was able to get out of this AM broadcast tuner here. And it just goes to show that AM back then wasn't the same as what you hear today. They used what bandwidth they had, and even though you were still limited and you couldn't get the full audio frequency spectrum, you could get a pretty amazing fidelity out of AM. The FM, of course, we know what it can do, but quite amazing. So I hope you enjoyed that. And just so you know, I have this on, the broadcaster is on right now. Both of the signal generators are broadcasting. And you can just kind of hear, and you can see if I go off channel on either side, right there, and here's the FM side. Okay, so they are both tuned, and that's the cool thing. This one's set to 1 megahertz or 1000 kilohertz, and we have our 94 megahertz right here. Now this other one here, FM multiplex stereo, that's where we would connect if we wanted it to be just strictly FM mono, or if we're using our external FM modulator or demodulator, the multiplex unit, which we're going to do later on, then you'd set it to this one, and that would give you actual standard modern multiplex stereo. So this is a really versatile setup, the way this thing works. Remember, this is all when stereo broadcast was a very, very new and unique thing. So this is a really important piece of history right here. Other manufacturers were doing this at the same time. I believe Pioneer definitely had one. I know Fisher had one that would do this, and I believe Sansui may have even had one at this time. I think they were around. So very interesting. The other thing I want to show you here is I did actually replace this volume control with a brand new pot, and you can see the first issue with these new pots. This was supposed to be a drop-in replacement for the $399. Got it on eBay. I think there's an eBay store that sells these that my friend ordered it from. But if you notice, you see how much throw there is on the on-off switch? It goes all the way up to number 2. And the original switch that we had was nowhere near that. I mean, here's the original one, and you can see when you turned it on, it just a tiny little click. See that? It had just a very little amount of throw. So that's one thing, and therefore when you turn this on, that logarithmic taper starts about at number 2 and goes up. You can see there, it'll go all the way. It still stops at 10, but you only have this much travel. So the volume, when you're turned halfway up, the volume is not half the loudness because of that. That's one thing I'm not real crazy about, and it has to do with the new switch that they put on that. This old one, if you read it, well, it's a 6 amp switch. I don't know if you can see that on there, but this is rated at 6 amps at 125 volts AC, and that other one, the new one, is also, but it just has a lot different clicker on it. So be aware, if you're going to buy one of these aftermarket volume knobs with the internal switch, that's one change that you're going to have. You'll just have to live with it. That being said, these two channels, the two sections of the pot, they track exceptionally well with one another. So if you noticed, the volume on both channels was very, very equal as you turned it up and down. So pros and cons, but that's a one thing about these controls. We'll look at it later on here. We'll flip the thing over again and look at it. But anyhow, I was able to get it to work. I'm pretty excited. Pretty cool. You probably won't see that too many other places where you have the right and left channels on AM and FM like that. So you see it here. You never know what you're going to see on this crazy channel, huh? All right, let's move on.
Just remember that it's a grand illusion.
And someday soon we'll stop to ponder what on earth's this spell we're under. We made the grade, yet still we wonder who the hell we are. What an awesome song. I wish I could play this song for you guys. Now let's go through and go over some of the things on the tuner. We'll check some alignments and so forth and make sure everything's perfect. But as you can see, this thing's really working well, and I don't know that we're going to have to do a whole lot of work on the AM or the FM tuner section. Not nearly what we had to do with the amplifier section. It's now time to go over the tuner and see how it's performing. And as we saw in our little demonstration, we were able to receive an AM and an FM station. But really, when you start looking into the AM portion of this receiver, you start to see some issues. Now on the surface, you may not realize it. So for instance, if I turn the volume up and I tune, I hope you can hear some of this.
Off the rim and no rebounded by him.
You could see
What is that flavor? What is that experience?
it pulls in. You get the point. You get the point. It's receiving. And it sounds pretty good, right? But let's connect it to a signal generator and see what's really happening. I have the signal generator set up for 990 kilohertz. It's just a quiet part of the dial down here. And I have 50 microvolts of output. Now, some of these tuners can get way down in, less than 10 microvolts they can receive and still hear a pretty, well, not a super great signal, but it'll receive it. And usually by the time you get up to 50 microvolts, you get a pretty clear sounding reception. So this should at least give us a relatively audible sounding signal. I'm going to go down here now, and we're going to tune this in to 990 kilohertz, if I can get my camera to cooperate. And turn the volume up. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this, but I'll hold the mic next to the speaker. And you can hear it, right? Now I'm going to just leave this like this for a second, and I'm going to turn up the amplitude of the signal until it gets clear. Let's go down a little bit. Okay. Still some noise, right? But it's much clearer, and we still don't have a full signal. Now let's take a look at where that signal generator is right now to get this sound. Look at that. 1 millivolt, which is 1,000 microvolts. That tells me that this receiver is pretty deaf. It's not receiving very good. And honestly, when one of these is working properly, every little hair on the dial will be another station. So this receiver is deaf. Now, it could be several things. It could be out of alignment, but I checked the alignment and it's really not. It could also be silver mica disease on one of the IF cans. I'm pretty sure it's not that. But what I did find is very interesting. I hope this shows up on the camera. This down here is the front end of the AM section of this amplifier. This is the RF portion, and then after it goes through here, it gets one stage of RF amplification. Then you have your mixer and oscillator right here, and then it comes out as the intermediate frequency. Looking at this front end, this is a little bit interesting. Let me back the camera out. You have that big long terminal strip for the antenna input. And you can see this first connection here is for the FM antenna. Then you have a ground lead that just goes straight to chassis. Then you have this lead, which is your AM input for like an outside external antenna. And if you lift this ground off of there, then you can connect that in between here and here. But if we follow along down here, and I zoom you in a little closer, it comes down into this RF coil right here, and then the secondary of that comes out and goes into this, and you can see there's an L15 coil in there. And then you can go to wide or distance, and essentially all you're doing with wide and distance is you're either putting this 18 ohm resistor in or out of series with this coil. Let's look up L15 and see what it is. When we look on the parts list, L15 is a loop stick. What is a loop stick? That's a fancy name for one of those ferrite rod antennas. So what it is it's a ferrite rod that's probably about 1/4 of an inch or so in diameter, maybe up to 1/2 of an inch in diameter. So 10 millimeters or so. And it just has some wire wrapped around it. Usually they'll use Litz wire, which is a special type of wire for low frequency RF, but it can also be just standard magnet wire. That is essentially an antenna. And if you notice, this radio does not have an internal antenna with it. That should be there, but it is not. And if you look very carefully at the schematic once again, this has to be in series with this in order to complete the circuit. So when we take this out of circuit right here, this has no path to ground. It's just sitting, floating open. So as a result, this can never be made totally resonant. Now, another way we can tell that is when we go into these trimmer adjustments, when we do the RF alignment, in the procedure where they actually are asking you to align, for instance, the 1600 kilocycles and the 600 and then the 1400, all of those adjustments make no difference when you turn them. You could turn the pots and the coils all the way one way or the other, and it'll make no difference in the sensitivity of the radio. And the reason being is that this coil is missing from the circuit. So we need a ferrite rod antenna. Now luckily, they give us some part numbers. If we look this up over here, Miller and Merritt, those are two that they show, we can use a Miller 705-A antenna. And when I looked, I did look up the characteristics, and it is a pretty substantial ferrite rod antenna. And so I spoke to the owner of this radio, and lo and behold, he was able to track down a brand new one of those, an original Miller 705-A in its original box, brand new. So he's going to ship it my way, and we're going to install that, and only then will we actually be able to do the alignment of the AM. Now, the FM's a lot better looking situation because it's pretty much spot on. It has very good sensitivity. Let's connect it up and see what it does. Okay, I now have the signal generator connected up to the FM portion of the receiver. And if we listen, we have a pretty clear sounding tone. Of course, you can hear some static, but and I'll show you, I'll tune on and off of it. Okay, so there it is. Let's look at what the amplitude of this signal is. .01 microvolts. That is 1/1000th of what the AM tuner is doing. Now, don't get too excited. There's actually more than 1 microvolt going in there. And the reason I say that, this is a kind of beginner error that a beginner's trap. I did not dig out my impedance matching box. So the input of this antenna circuit is not designed for 50 ohm termination like you would on an amateur radio or something. So as a result, you're actually getting higher than 1 microvolt, but it's still very low. It's only a few microvolts of input signal, that's all. So pretty amazing how sensitive the FM section is. It's working perfectly. And if I connect this up to an antenna, and here we go.
Don't forget to shop servers.
I think you get the point. I barely move the knob and another station comes in. And that's the way these should work. These are extraordinarily sensitive receivers. Any of these old Scott or Fisher receivers from this era are just marvels of, design technology. With what they had to work with, just vacuum tubes and coils and capacitors, it's just beyond belief how sensitive and selective they were able to get these receivers. And that's why I like working with them. It just amazes me. I understand today with DSP and with synthesized tuning and so forth, you can get all kinds of sensitivity and selectivity. But to be able to do it with this old technology just amazes me. So I love working with this sort of thing. Anyway, you can see the FM is ready to go. The AM, we're going to have to wait, and we're going to see when that tuning rod comes in, that antenna, the ferrite rod antenna, and we'll get that installed, and we'll see what kind of an improvement that makes. We will also then move on, and we will do our multiplex video on this little unit down here, the LM35. So I'm really excited to get started on that, and that should finish up this series. So I'm going to end this one right here and get this uploaded. And as always, I wish you all peace, joy, happiness, and good health in your lives. Not sure if I'm going to get another one posted before the holidays, but if I don't, I wish you all a joyful and Merry Christmas. And I really hope that the new year that comes brings joy and happiness and goodness and improvement of our lifestyle to all of you. And I sincerely mean that. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you really soon. Bye-bye.